yesterday afternoon and asked her to get us a memo with some suggestions on how we can better target that $2 million to some of the areas we've identified, which is broadband, housing, uh, 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 a lot of well, construction, the trades, because there's so much housing money and renovations going on in the budget. So we'll see what they come back with, and hopefully we can come up with a plan for that $2 million that makes the most sense to get workers going quickly.
And
So
and
that's
some
what.
and Mr. Chair,
Yep.
some of the testimony that you may have missed that kind of crazy busy day when we had UVM and the state colleges in. I do recall that the state colleges have certificates and fairly quick boot up for line workers in workforce development with broadband. I was today, when I have a chance, I'm going to email Catherine Lavasser and the VSCS team to clarify that. Maureen Hebert, I think, was the one testifying. So Nathan, if you'd be kind enough to get me both, I asked you for Catherine's, but if you'd get me Maureen Hebert's email, that would be great too. Because I believe they are a piece of this too.
Okay, I'll send to you right now.
Here's the challenge, and I'm sure that Senator Brock can identify to this, is that we have $100 million to spend in the broadband area. And we talked a lot yesterday about putting some of that money towards workforce development for broadband jobs that are needed now.
Right.
I'm concerned if we focus this $2 million, it's one of these questions where we have several pots and we have in some ways a dedicated pot for broadband that we could hopefully take care of some of those needs. If we try and take care of them out of this smaller pot, we could wind up using most of it just for line people, stringing line. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but we need to know what's out there in various sources to fund this. And we'll face that. We'll face that.
One thing that I would just interject at this point, we mentioned that we've got lots of pots. The problem is we got lots of people stirring stuff in the pots.
Yep.
And as a result, we potentially cause some confusion. But that goes to the issue that I think the governor has been spending a lot of time talking about, at least he certainly has with us. And that is there this whole spending exercise that we're going on seems to almost lack strategy, because we have a whole bunch of individual things going on, but we haven't tied it together as part of a strategy of what we're doing in each of these major areas. I think that's a major concern to him. And the warning flag is up regarding, how we, and it's at this stage, it probably is not so much how we handle it, but how the House handles the stuff that we pass as to whether or not this winds up as a veto overall.
No, I hear you. I think there's going to be a lot more discussion once we're faced with this very difficult time frame from when we got this information and the money in the governor's proposal to when we have to get it out. I take a little solace in the fact that we probably have 2 more weeks after we get it out to have ongoing conversations that meet the concerns of the governor and of us as well. But in order to start having those conversations, we got to get this bill out of here in some fashion. So one of the things that I did have a conversation yesterday with Tom Cavett. Basically, you'll see. I don't know if it's. We'll get David to post it separately after we go through the beginning stages of 159 again. The thing on the capital grants, I asked David to draft something up pretty much based on Joan's good memo on the program and turn it into legislation. The one thing that I was concerned with was that the modeling using just the REMI model as a key component may not be the best model and may lack somewhat legislative involvement. So I spoke to Cavett, and he's here to testify on an alternative that where the model might be approved at least by joint fiscal before we start spending some of this money. And you remember Ken Jones said to us on Friday, I think, that the earliest they could start moving this stuff, given all the other stuff they have on their plate, was September. So I think we have a couple of months to, or at least a month to decide on this model. But this is one of the things that I think will be a topic of ongoing conversation as we move forward over the next 2 weeks. So let's start with David Hall, if he's here. David, are you here?
I am here.
Sort of hear him, I don't see him. Oh, can we go live? Yes, thank you.
I see him.
Oh, you do? Okay.
There he is.
Exist. I have one of
David, good morning. Thank you for all your hard work yesterday.
Sure.
You
So,
guys, well, actually, Mr. Chair, thank you for your hard work on this too. It's
trying to keep this moving.
getting it ready for us to then move it takes a lot of work. So thank you both.
Okay, so let's start with I think where we left off. I think we had gotten through seed capital and on the bill, and I wanted to go to the BIPOC section. I know Senator Rahm had some suggestions, and can you just walk us through that very briefly, highlighting any changes that are in this draft? Let's pull up the latest draft that I sent out to the committee last night. It does
Yes,
not.
can we post that for the public so that
Yes,
they can?
yes, we should post that for the public, but know that this does not have the pieces on apprenticeship, which is yet to be drafted,
Right.
and on recovery or capital yet, but we'll get to those very soon. So, in fact, David, why don't you post the latest draft you sent to me, and it's a draft because we really haven't worked through exactly some of the things on the new pieces. So the public should know that that's a work in progress, but let's just, in order to avoid confusion, just the one you sent this morning.
Okay, so that would be version 5. I can send that directly to the committee right now if that would be helpful.
Yep, and let Nathan post it.
It's already posted.
Okay. And so let's pick up with BIPOC, then we'll talk about relocated workers briefly, and then we'll move into the capital grant section, which should get us to a point in time where hopefully Tom Cavett will be available. And actually we'll hear from Joan first if she's with us. So let's do the BIPOC stuff, if we can pull that up.
So this starts at the very bottom of page 22. And for your record, good morning, David Hall, Legislative Counsel. This is draft 5.1 of a draft H159, which I suspect ultimately manifests as a committee amendment to the House bill. So again, at the bottom of page 22, section 14, state BIPOC business development. So this section was included in the House bill as it came to you. The underlying language is the House language. The highlights in yellow are draft changes for you to consider based on work you've been doing. So the first bit here, subsection A, is unchanged. It's the intent language. I'm assuming for now you just kind of want to hop through the differences to the House. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So then We have findings in B and about data collection and about the process for potentially developing this project. Page 25, top of 25, subsection C, BIPOC Business Development Project. So again, in a nutshell, 15-second overview. Remember that the purpose here is to convene through what was in the House one contract, but now one or more contracts, any number of businesses, organization, community groups, and have a facilitated discussion about what the best sort of entity or structure, network, framework would be to help support BIPOC community and businesses. You'll see in C1A that there are no more live appropriations in this bill because the funding is all in the budget. And so I have restructured the sections to reflect, to cross-reference that subdivision of the budget where the money lives, but then the program is, further refined, modified, clarified in this bill. So of the $150,000 appropriated to ACCD in the budget, that's in G302A13, to provide outreach and technical assistance, the agency shall provide funding for one or more contractors to convene BIPOC businesses, organizations, community leaders, other organizations, ACCD, to create a set of recommendations on how to support BIPOC business development. And the timeline in 2 is compressed, not compressed. It's I guess it's sort of modified so that the RFP will still go out in August, but rather than have that September check-in date, it keeps it fluid until the process is finalized in October. And again, rather than just envisioning one potential consultant or contractor, it could be more than one. It could be multiple people around the state or however they're going to work it. So conforming change there. Same here in subdivision B. So D, collection of data. We didn't see in the findings above, but as part of the work on the business portal that the Secretary of State has been working on, they're trying to collect more data and information about people who are starting businesses in the state. And, this sort of extends that concept in D1 to people who are basically regulated by OPR. And remember that there are different levels there. So that's why it says licensure, certification, or registration. And then they will use and share that data, within and among the agencies of the administration. And 2, and that is it for the changes relative to the House in this section.
Yeah. May I ask a question or two? As far as the data collection, is it mandatory or voluntary on the part of the person filling out the forms?
I believe it is voluntary. I believe that they'll make the forms, they'll structure them so that it's just self-reported and it's voluntary. That's my understanding.
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chairman, that's my understanding.
We had some testimony on this, I think I recall, where there was a box to be checked off that said, I don't want to answer or something like that. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, I think what we could have Lauren Hibbert in, but we've talked about this with her in GovOps and a little bit here. She is looking at other states that ask for this information after licensure and registration. So again, kind of like labor was talking about, it doesn't look like a function of the decision. It's a voluntary form afterward that helps them collect this information. So she wants to be sensitive to making sure someone doesn't feel like how they answer this question has anything to do with OPR's decision on any front. and is looking to other states for guidance, as many states already collect this information.
I mean, if that's the
So
committee,
does this create a process that doesn't exist for data collection? Because I would assume that we don't normally go back to licensees after they've been licensed with a questionnaire, do we?
Well, we're not collecting this data now, so we would have to create a new process of some type, no matter what, when it takes place in the process.
well, it's not an issue for the portal because that's not operating now. But for the, it's unclear to me whether we're asking historical data or just data going forward from OPR. What's your pleasure? I mean, do you want to, if you want to make a perspective, we can make that clear, just like we can make it clear on it's voluntary in nature.
I think that's important to do.
David,
And I
you-
think it's important to clarify that it's done in such a way that it is not a factor in the decision for registration, which I think would be a concern for some people.
Well, certainly the way it's written, if it's mandatory that you get this information for people trying to either get licensed as a business or get a certificate or license from OPR, I mean, I guess we certainly don't want that to be a barrier to them, or I don't think we want it to be a barrier to them getting their license. So,
Well,
if
I don't think
David-
you want it to be a barrier, but I don't also think you want to create the perception that it's an advantage over others. In other words,
Well-
that BIPOC people would be treated differently. And the whole point is treat everybody alike. And if you're going to collect data, one, it needs to be voluntary, and two, it needs to be separated from decision-making.
Okay. Does anybody have a problem with that? Because I'm sure David could come up with a sentence to make that clearer. I think that's probably the
No
way.
problem with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the direction Lauren Hibbert would want to go. And that's essentially best practice. So no, I don't have a problem with that.
So, Senator Rahm, you had asked for, you had some concerns with this section. Does these changes or the version now include what you were concerned about?
Yeah, and I ran these changes by some of the House members who, kind of crafted the original language from my knowledge, and they thought they were really helpful and positive changes. So that was heartening to hear. This particular change in my mind is because a lot of, people of color are overrepresented in self-proprietors, small businesses. I think we just want to know, how we're doing, how, this is another part of the business community that otherwise we wouldn't have information about if they not registering a formal business.
Okay. So David, you've heard the discussion. We'll come up with a sentence or two on
No
that.
problem.
Okay, let's move on. So we're finished with BIPOC. The next section is seed capital. The only thing I had on here, and I just wrote David about 15 minutes ago, is there's a terminology used in here called, oh, you changed it already. Okay. Fast capital investment. I think this $900,000 was to have some added parameters on it that are listed later on, and I think in this subsection. But this fast capital investment program terminology came out of nowhere. I've never heard of it. I don't even think David Bradbury had heard of it. And it either needed a definition or it needed to be eliminated. I think we want this money to be more targeted, as it's said in here, related to COVID. But it didn't have a definition. So I asked that either David define it or get rid of it. I guess he's chosen to get rid of it. Anything else you want to explain? I think we beat this one pretty pretty well. Oh yeah, there was a couple of changes that I had suggested here based upon Cassie Polimus's testimony, saying that it might be possible for these folks to look to VITA for some ongoing funding. This is just enabling legislation and not permissive. It's not a mandatory, but basically to have the seed capital fund be exploring opportunities that they might have with VITA. Is that a fair explanation, David?
Sure, yes.
Okay. So I think we could keep going down.
So I have not made any change here, but I do just want to make sure everybody's good or not. I mean, we had talked about this a little bit last week. Senator Brock had some concerns about, whether it was clear enough that this is, ensuring the diversity of backgrounds, but not necessarily mandating that there be, a minimum amount of representation. So I didn't change it yet. I wasn't sure if you wanted to. If you wanted to, I thought we could, strike that because you don't have to have it necessarily, or you could just leave it as it is. It's up to the committee, but I just want to double check.
I would certainly prefer the strikeout.
Who's on the board now? Or there are women on the board now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I think a majority women. I feel. I thought it was 3 and 2. But I thought we had other language, David, that you had generated that was that acknowledged wanting to ensure that we continued with fairly diverse voices on this.
Well, it's just the part A proposition of the subdivision without necessarily the including language.
I'm trying to find you. What page are you on?
Page 30, section 16.
30.
This same discussion has been coming up a lot in the context of housing and some of the investment funds. And, when we talk about communities or Vermonters who have historically, suffered from discrimination, sometimes the lists are very long, and sometimes the lists are very short, and there's not a lot of consistency, but it seems to be under inclusive if it's, considering the breadth of communities we have in places like fair housing or the Public Accommodations Act, things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. Again, my point from Friday was the intention underlying the House language is, lines 8 and 9 ensure a board with diverse personal backgrounds. And so you don't have to have the including language one way or the other. And even if you did, you could add or subtract from a list of people because it's a non-exhaustive construct.
I think you're fine with ending it after experiences. I think that diverse professional and personal backgrounds and experiences encompasses it. I don't think you need to call out specifically. I think that says it.
I mean, if I may, Mr. Chair, I don't think either actually get at what the issue is with access to capital, which is that there are groups that have historically been underrepresented in access to capital. And if we just sort of throw out, groups that we think should be on the board, that isn't necessarily addressing the root issue, which is that there have been people, not just historically, but currently, Vermont has, in the last 10 years, less than 2% of all capital in the state has gone to businesses, minority owned businesses. So we're doing very abysmally in our access to capital for people of color. And I'm sure one could say the same thing about other groups. I just, worked with some venture capital folks on that particular research about access to capital for new Americans and people who identify as BIPOC. I think we could say, ensuring that there's representation from people excluded historically. Historically is problematic because it's not even historic, it's happening right now, but excluded from accessing capital. And
How about
Yeah.
previously excluded?
well, they're
So,
still excluded. But
I
Well,
just
but-
want to make sure we're talking about the same issues, because on the one hand, we have the investment side, which is addressed on your screen in subdivision 4. And then this other discussion is about, the 5-member board of advisors and the statutory language that governs that.
Right.
So I know that they're related, but I also don't want to conflate the discussion between whether there is, a push in the language for targeting investment versus the statutory change proposed to the constitution of that board.
but the board makes decisions, right?
It advises, but it does not actually make the investment decisions itself.
Who are they advising?
They're advising the fund manager, which VSET at this point, and then VSET has, as you said, Ken Merritt, and I forget the other gentleman's name.
So they're still deciding who is a risk and advising probably, it sounds like 2 people who identify as white men right now. Is that correct?
I guess I'm in agreement with Senator Clarkson that I think by adding this language, you may wind up with, it's a small board and you may wind up excluding other people. I think the general goal here is met certainly in a flexible way by saying you want diversity on this board, unless you want to go and say, I want 1 woman or at least 2 or 3 women and 2 people of color. I mean, I think you just, I don't think for an advisory board of 5 members, we need to get too specific at this point. I think the goal.
That's fine. I mean, what I really want is results.
Well,
I
you've
would
got
like,
that above. David
I
said,
know, hopefully.
David says that's the much more important section to give priority with this money to the group of people who have historically not.
So can you remind me, they have that in their reporting requirements now? to
No,
demonstrate-
it's more than just reporting, I think. Go back up, David.
Well, it says they should
Go up to number 4.
prioritize.
The fund shall prioritize
Sources of
sourcing
funding.
and funding on BIPOC,
Right.
veteran, and women-owned businesses.
So you have 2 issues that can come up. I mean, David articulated one, which is you can try to be exhaustive. The other is that you look back and you might have helped veteran and women-owned businesses and no BIPOC-owned businesses. I mean, UVM could not name a single BIPOC business or entity that they've worked with in the last year. And so they sent me a list of women-owned businesses they worked with, which is not okay. So, I mean, it's one thing, it should prioritize this. I think that's true, but we should still have broken out information at the end of this to know who was actually helped.
Yeah, but that's
Well,
in,
it seems to me what's important is knowing if there has not been help, why? Was it unconscious bias? Was it deliberate bias? Was it that BIPOC businesses did not seek out or apply? We have to understand reasons before we go and assign blame and assume that there's some process of discrimination going on. To me, what we should be doing is we should be ensuring that there is in fact an open door and that everybody is welcome to go through it. That's different from
It's very
assigning
subjective.
categories and assigning priorities.
So let's go to the report section, David. Maybe we could add something there to to address this if it's not already there.
I'm not sure that this has its own reporting requirement because I believe the underlying statute
Right.
does, but I'd have to double check on that.
Well, keep going down. I thought there was a report that was due on this money. Maybe I'm dreaming.
Oh, no, you're right. I think you added this in after, that's right.
There it goes.
I forgot we.
Oh no!
added
Oh yeah,
this
this is for the working with Vita. Maybe we can just
Right.
add a sentence on how it's meeting the goals above or something like that. Because
Sure.
this is sort of a little one-off pot of money for that has added requirements to it. So why don't we add a sentence there to track section 4 a little bit as part of their report back, and then maybe we can move on. Okay. So David, I don't think there's anything new on S62, which is the next section. This is lock, stock, and barrel, exactly what we passed, right?
That's correct.
Okay, does anybody need to review this again? The Appropriations Committee did go along with our request for $1 million. So now we're into capital investment grants. Why don't you walk us through this? We'll try and get a brief response from Joan, and then if Tom Covette's with us, we'll talk about the modeling associated with this.
Sure. I see that Tom has joined the
Okay.
Zoom room.
Oh, great.
So as the chair indicated, this is based largely on the memorandum you previously received concerning the outlines of the program. And I've only highlighted lines 13 and 14 because the whole thing is new to both, your bill and to the House bill. So understand that this is all new draft language. So it follows a pretty typical construct. It does cross-reference the $11 million that was appropriated in the budget. And it's to design and implement a capital investment grant program consistent with this section. The purpose in 2 here is to make funding available for transformational projects that will provide each region of the state with the opportunity to attract businesses, retain existing businesses, create jobs, and invest in their communities by encouraging capital investments, economic growth. And 3, it does direct the agency to collaborate with other state agencies, regional partners, and community partners to identify potential regional applicants and projects to ensure the distribution of grants throughout the regions of the state. Regions are not defined here anywhere, but it's just the more generic concept of, regions, whether that falls along the lines of like the RPCs and RDCs or however they're going to carve it up. There's a piece here, subsection B, on eligible applicants. So to be eligible, you have to meet the following: located within the state. If you're a for-profit, you have to have a 10% equity interest in the project, or you can be a nonprofit. And then the way this is structured right now, this applies to both, that the grant funding would represent not more than 50% of the total project cost. Wasn't entirely clear to me whether that was supposed to be limited to one type or the other, but right now, the way this is built, it's either for-profit or nonprofit.
You
The
haven't-
applicant has
you
to
ha-
demonstrate.
Well, we'll hear from Joan about that. I read it as
Sure.
they wanted it to apply to all grants, but okay. And that's the way you have it set up, right? For
That's
both
correct.
Nonprofit and for-profits, okay.
Right now, that would apply to everybody.
Yep, okay.
So the applicant would have to demonstrate community and regional support for the project. Grant funding is needed to complete the project, that they're leveraging additional sources from local, state, federal programs, and an ability to manage the project with requisite experience and a plan for fiscal viability. So there is this piece here. These are entities that are not eligible to apply. So state or local government operated business, the municipality itself, the business that with any affiliate owns or operates more than 20 locations, and then publicly traded companies.
I would say on this one, I'd like Joan to, I know she mentioned before, this was taken, I think, from Small Business Administration. It's an oddball kind of thing. I'm wondering if we're trying to get at, we don't want super large businesses or something. I don't know, if there's $1 billion corporation, if that's the group that we're saying they don't need this kind of money, that's one thing. But to say, based upon whether you have 20 locations or not, seems odd. So I'd be curious to know why the SBA does it this way. But it's in here for now for discussion purposes.
Okay, the C awards amount eligible uses. So right now the award would not exceed the lesser of $500,000 or the estimated net state fiscal impact of the project based on the agency's modeling.
Let me just say on that, to be clear, the administration suggested $3 million, getting a reputation of wanting to go slow. I'd like to see how this operates before we start giving out grants of $3 million. So this is an arbitrary figure, however. So I just want to highlight that.
Right. And I'll just put in a plug for transformational, and transformational may require serious amount of money. And I understand where we are, given that we're only doing 11 million this round and we have 33 and 23.
I very well may be willing to go much higher, but I'd like to see it play out first.
Right.
The whole timing is really
Challenge.
difficult for me.
Yeah. I got it.
Okay, David.
C2 relates to the use of the grants, and that would be for the acquisition of property and equipment, construction, renovation, and related capital expenses. 3, a recipient may combine grant funds with funding from other sources, but shall not use grant funds from multiple sources for the same cost in the same project. So no double dipping is C3. C4, funds would actually be released upon the agency's determination that the applicant had met all program conditions and requirements.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Sure.
No double dipping.
Yep.
How do you distinguish between double dipping and stacking? So, you want to buy a building or something and
Right.
you get $500,000 from this program and you get $500,000 from, I assume when it says other sources, I assume it may mean other public sources, but let's assume you get 500,000 towards buying the building from the SBA. Is that double dipping?
I wouldn't think so. I always thought of it in terms of like, you can't buy the same tractor twice with two different, bill two different funders for the same thing, basically.
Okay.
That's how I always interpret it. If you had, a building like that in my mind, that looks like layers of insurance, right? And
Right.
The SBA gets 0 to 300, and the state gives 300 to 500, and then above that is private. But I defer to Joan. I assume that's something they've worked out.
Okay. Let's keep going. We're running out of time.
So I'll let you read the piece here, D, on the data model the chair referenced. So this language is fluid enough that if they decided, hey, the REMI model is what we want, let's take that to joint fiscal, and it would be up to joint fiscal to approve it. But they could also, come up with something else, and then that decision is here slated for no later than September 1st. So that's for the model and the methodology.
Okay,
Under E, so this is the application process and decision and award process. So I tried to piece this together and sort of put it in chronological order. So I welcome any correction if this is not right. But under E1, it's this concept of we take applications over a 3-month period, and at the end of the 3 months, we decide based on what we have in hand. So that's rolling for 3 months, and then approval from among the group that are available as of the end of that period. And then 2, using that model and the methodology, the agency gets the first crack at the application. They analyze the information provided in application to estimate the net state fiscal impact of a project. That includes the factors they provided in that memo. So grand list, supply chain, jobs, GDP. Under 3, and this is a little fluid too. So this is the concept of the interagency team, which is relates to sort of that Northern Borders process, but it charges the Secretary of Commerce with appointing a team, which may include members from DED, DHCD, and then my understanding is that they will they'll invite other members of agencies to participate depending on the location and type of project and the application. And so the team will review, analyze, and recommend projects for funding based on the estimated impact of the project, which the model did, and then also these other contributing factors. So if you think back to the memo, there was the grid and the point values that could be assigned. I tried to capture those things sort of categorically in A, B, C, and D, rather than going into the granularity of that memo. So obviously you can add more or subtract here if you want. But conceptually, it's, the transformational nature of the project readiness, the consistency with regional plans and priorities, and then the impact on the workforce, whether new or retention. Any questions on that part?
Yes.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, David. I guess my concern with number 2 is that this is a grant that's supposed to be a catalyst for change regionally, and it doesn't really have anything regional there as a barometer for success. So, I mean, you're estimating the net state fiscal impact of a project. None of those factors are regional factors. And I guess I'd like us to think about what would be an appropriate regional factor. And if we're going to focus on regional, let's actually mean it and have a factor and or something that.
Yeah, so I think it's important to me. I'm sure Joan can go into this more. So I was trying to build this in my head. What does this look like? And it seems we start with that objective stuff, right? The numbers that we can plug into the model, whatever that is, and that will spit out numbers. And whether they can do that on a regional basis, I don't know. Again, I don't even know that we consistently define regions of Vermont. We don't. It's like even the RDC and RPCs don't always line up as to what a region is, right? But the other factors where they will be scoring the impacts and adding points to an application do very specifically contemplate regional implications. So you'll see, whether this is transformational for a region is A, and there's more data, there's more stuff in their memo. B and C, this concept of demonstrated collaboration with stakeholders and funding sources, but also alignment with regional plans and priorities. That very much considers, have you worked with partners in the region? Do you have support from those communities? Right. Will this benefit more than one town or municipality in the region? Right. Not just limited to one, big town, but is it going to help the region? And then also, look at the regional plan, look at economic development priorities that have been identified for the region. Does it
Right.
line up? Does it further that stuff? And then also a little bit for the workforce. Does it retain jobs in the region? Does it create jobs for the region? So I think I understand your point. I don't know the extent to which the objective part can capture regionality. I know that the subjective part is definitely pegged
Yep.
more closely to that.
And I think you've done a wonderful job distilling our conversation of Thursday, Friday. So I appreciate that. I just, in the objective part, I just want to make sure we
Sure.
also include that because
Yeah, so that's probably more cadet commerce kind of questions, the extent to which they're able to do that.
Okay, let's
go.
we're running a little late, so let's keep going.
Sure. So you'll see in 3 here on line 11, even though the interagency team makes the recommendations and does that work and the agency runs the modeling, it's ultimately right now, the Secretary of Commerce has the final authority to approve projects. So that's the construct that came in their proposal. So an F, just quickly, there's you have to have a grant agreement and it has to include provisions about auditing and access to records, including that the agency and the auditor of accounts can access the records and monitor the award. And then there is a report for the December of this year to come back to committees of jurisdiction about what they did.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna switch the order up a little bit because I want to make sure we have Tom here. We'll no doubt be dealing with this again tomorrow. And hopefully we'll get Joan on after Tom. But I had a conversation with Tom yesterday, and I have to admit I don't understand all these modeling things and REMI versus other alternatives. I had heard that REMI might be more global than what we need for these kinds of projects. So I invited Tom to come testify and tell us where the importance of whatever model we come up with lies in coming up with some objective criteria for what we're trying to do here with this proposal. I listened to the Northern Borders folks, and not surprisingly, it's a federal program that has all these layers and inputs and controls and stuff like that. We're not wanting to go that far, but we want to, and we're giving pretty much in the end game discretion to the agency, but I want the starting information to be as objective and solid as possible. So that's why I think there's been a precedent before where joint fiscal has worked with has had some approval authority on what model is used, and the way it's structured here, I think, is that the agency and the legislative economist would collaborate on the appropriate model and bring it to joint fiscal for their approval. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom to try and explain to everybody why this is not just a little, piece of the machinery here, but an important piece. So, Tom, welcome.
Hi,
Thank
Tom.
you. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. Looking forward to seeing you all in person at some point in the not too distant future also. Fingers crossed. So yeah, these are extraordinary times, and there are extraordinary amounts of money that are floating around in various ways that we've never had to contend with before. The magnitude of some of these programs is just once in a lifetime opportunity, and the way we treat and analyze programs and funds and monies have been fundamentally transformed through the experience of the last year. But I think it's always really important to keep focused on the extent to which we can target money, whether it's sort of, federal money that's not directly coming from Vermont taxpayers or at the expense of other programs, or our own revenue, to target those to have the most impact possible. So putting the money in places where it really makes a difference, where it changes what would otherwise occur. You know, I think there's several different levels at which to look at this. From 30,000 feet, you know, I would say we were pressed last year when there was federal money available. We had to spend it right away. There were a lot of things that went out in ways that I think we would have done differently had we more time to analyze that. And I testified before a number of committees about using a profitability metric for economic recovery grants. And that was deemed to be too time consuming, too cumbersome, fine. But the very little postmortem that we've seen from the auditor on 57 of those grants showed exactly why profitability was the important thing to look at, because 38 of the 57 companies had actually made more money than, and you couldn't really define that as being a critical need when that's the case. I think that's always a challenge when the state is providing direct cash grants. And it's really important to design programs that are bulletproof. And that's not simple in terms of administration, design, and use. I think what happened with EB5 is an important lesson in terms of what can happen when state government goes beyond what it does best and it only can do, which has to do with public interest and public spending, not getting in bed with every good private initiative that exists. Leave to the private sector what they do best, and you know, focus on the things that only state government can do. And there are many, many things state government can do that help businesses. And so anyway, I think that there is more time with this program, and I don't know if there's consideration of doing a deeper dive into things that could best benefit the business community and business growth in Vermont, but I'd certainly at least put in a plug for that. That said, with this program, this is, again, cash grants to individual companies. It's not pandemic related in terms of losses and needs. This is just saying, going forward, where can we put money that really transforms the economy? When you're dealing with these grants on a company by company basis, though, the potential for whether it's real or perceived fraud, corruption, the like, is very real. And there needs to be a process that's fair and transparent, and loading it all up in one agency with a model they develop and criteria and such that are internal, I think is a recipe for disaster. So I think it's really important to have objective models that can at least help score entities and real transparency in the process. The other thing that a modeling process like that does is it screens out projects that can be self-defeating. You know, there was a list of projects, and maybe 5 or 6 projects that were put out as sort of, sample recipients. There might be, one of those was a hemp company that wanted to buy a building, and that's a great thing. It's wonderful that's a new area of growth, and they're wanting to do that. But there are a bunch of hemp companies in Vermont, and if you give money to one from the state, it puts the others at a disadvantage, at a competitive disadvantage. So you need to be careful that you're not cannibalizing another company by so-called incenting one. And, you know, the government does a lot of things well, but having worked with, for, and consulted with large investment banking firms, investment banking is not something the state does well. And that's a difficult thing to jump into. So I'm just sounding some cautionary notes. The modeling process, I don't think there's any reason to invent a new model to score economic impact and economic benefit to the state from various types of projects. The cost benefit model at Veggie took almost 2 years to develop, and it's not perfect, but it does a good job scoring economic impacts. You could take that to a lower regional level, but the data is thinner and thinner the further you go below the state level, and I'm not sure that would result in meaningful information. But I would recommend using the existing model if you're going down this route. There are a lot of detailed kinds of things I could go into. I just got this last version at 8:30 this morning, and first saw the bill last night in discussing with the chairman. So there's a lot more detail I could get into, but with respect to the model, that's what I'd recommend doing. Let's just see if there's anything else just in the text that was there. It was mentioned this 20 location thing. I can't imagine what that pertains to or why that's a meaningful screen. If you're trying to limit it to smaller companies, the number of locations isn't determinative of the size. So, that's not a screen that would make sense. And publicly traded also. There are gigantic corporations that are not publicly traded, one of which is largest private employer in the state. So I don't know that distinction is significant either. So anyway, broad brush, those are some initial comments. I'd be happy to work with the committee and the Joint Fiscal Office in making detailed recommended changes as quickly as you need them.
Do you think you could get us a one-pager critique of or comments on this proposal by tomorrow morning?
Sure.
Okay. So the one area that I thought your testimony would focus on was the proposal to have you work with the department or the agency on coming up with a model, perhaps a more simplified, specific, whatever model than REMI, to bring before the Joint Fiscal Committee for its approval. It sounds to me like your testimony is saying just use the REMI model.
Well, it's not just REMI.
No.
The cost benefit model includes, it uses REMI as a component, but REMI is basically just a calculator for quantifying both initial impacts and secondary impacts based on a concept known as input-output. So that's a piece of the existing Veggie cost benefit model. And it's an expensive model, but both JFO and ACCD have paid for it and have access to it. And it would be reasonable and it's accepted, in terms of its use with Veggie. So I don't know why you wouldn't use that. I wouldn't be reinventing some model, and you make it so-called simpler at real risk to making it less accurate. And I think you could spend a lot of time and energy trying to recreate a model. It wouldn't be significantly different from that.
I think we're missing each other because we're talking a different, potentially different language here.
Mr.
Uh,
Chair, may I-
The proposal, the proposal in the bill now is, one of the goals is to make sure that our economist had some say, at least in developing the standard or methodology for scoring these proposals. Are you saying that's of no value?
No, to the extent that there is, and there is additional information that's requested here in terms of impacts, commentary on regional impacts. There are things that could be done that would be in addition to that. And I do think it's really critical to have Joint Fiscal Committee review, control, and oversight of what's happening with this, and legislative, input on it. So I think that's valuable, but I would start with a cost benefit model as a way to score things.
Okay, so it's an existing cost benefit model plus your conversations with the agency and bringing it forward, the cost benefit model with additional tweaks or factors brought forward to joint fiscal to approve, which I assume they probably would if they, because this stuff is fairly complicated, but
So,
okay.
Mr.
Does
Chair, may
Senator
I-
Clarkson, yes, go ahead.
So Tom, thank you for this. I guess I have two questions. One is what additionally, how could we additionally use your profitability metric? Is that able to be
That's a
used?
different Senator Clarkson, that's when he was talking about profitability, he was talking
Right,
about,
but he was saying it was additional and nobody, that it costs more money. And so I guess my question is that not able to be incorporated in anything we currently have available to us? That would be an additional cost to do? I guess
Well, that had to do with the economic recovery grants, not the.
Right, but we have some of those also coming up.
Yeah, so that it does now look at a business's adjusted tax loss. I'd want to look at.
let's not go to
Okay,
recovery
then
grants. Stay on this topic, okay?
Okay, so before we move to, I guess my question is, this is for me, this capital investment is not just about a single business. It could be about an entity or a building or something that is that's bigger than just a single business. It could be a community effort, or it could be a regional investment that is not just a specific business related. Because I agree, I think it would be, I think it has to be sort of slightly bigger than just thinking about individual businesses, and the concern about you can't incent just one company with these. I mean, that I agree with you. There's sort of a fine line with the state investing in any one company, but there are lots of efforts that could be invested in that would have big impact in all these different regions that aren't a single company.
Right, but what you want to do is make sure that you're not giving money away for something that would have happened without the money.
Right.
So this is critical, in terms of the first assumption. If you just say, we saw this with PPP and all the other programs, you say, hey, money's available. Believe me, there'll be whole cottage industry of consultants and accountants that rush forward and figure out, how to get that money to their clients. The question is, if you say money's available, all kinds of hands will go up, and everybody would like to have, some additional free money to add to the profitability. where does it really make a difference? Where would a
Right.
project not have happened otherwise? That's where the money is critical. And then in things that the private sector doesn't do, like broad workforce training programs and infrastructure, the roads to these places and you
Yeah.
know, utility connections and systems and all that kind of thing. So, you know, that's where you get benefit, is when you can target like that. And just to follow up on what Michael was saying about, you know, some of the modeling aspects that aren't there. For example, if you wanted to have a, you know, a commentary on sub-state impacts without doing full bottom-up modeling, you could still, you know, you'd look at an investment and say, okay, here's what the model is telling us is going to happen. And maybe there's a whole lot of, say, secondary spending that's things like, you know, design services and professional services and the like. And you know those businesses are concentrated in Chittenden County. And you could say, even though the business is in, you know, the Northeast Kingdom, if a big part of the secondary demand that's coming from it is somewhere else in the state, we know that could just be a commentary saying, you know, it's less impactful than if it was using something that's a resource supporting farmers in that same area or something like that. That's a softer kind of analysis, but it's sort of an add-on. But you could look at that and derive that from what the cost benefit model is telling you.
This may be outside your area expertise, and I'm sure Joan will have some comments as well, but in your experience with the Joint Fiscal Office, you look at the size of these grants, and it was proposed to be capped at $3 million, and we're trying to land on an appropriate number starting off. Is that something that you don't feel comfortable commenting on, or could you make some observations?
Well, I think any amount helps, you know, nudge a project forward. But right now, access to capital from the private sector is not a problem. There is more capital available at lower cost than almost at any other time I can remember. So if there's a project that's profitable and somebody who can talk about it, pitch it, you know, there's funding available. So, you know, is a grant from this going to be the thing that makes or breaks a really good idea that could pretty much stand on its own, but, you know, there's a little something. You know, I think calibrating the award level to the net fiscal benefit is one, you know, good way to size it. But there needs to be a review process that also looks at whether it's really needed. I'm not sure as you get into much bigger numbers, you know, if you're really funding something that can't get private capital to do it, it's probably pretty high risk. So you really want to look at it when it gets to be a bigger number. So yeah, I think your impulse there to start small, also watch how the program operates is probably a good idea. When the first BEPSI program, the Economic Advancement Tax Incentive Program, was launched, you know, it was monitored for a while and it was going off the rails, and that's when Veggie was brought in as a replacement for it, you know, with a lot of correctives. So, you know, I don't think that's a bad way to approach it.
Okay. Tom, does anybody have any further questions for Tom? We're going to give Joan about 10 minutes.
I just have a quick response to what Tom just said. I mean, some of these transformational projects, Tom, could be nonprofits for whom there is the access to capital isn't necessarily so easy. You know, I think there's what you just said is sort of an assumption, and it may be huge and you know, have lots of different components that makes it a complex project, which maybe high risk, but also maybe hugely highly beneficial if it goes.
Right,
So-
so the beneficial part of it would be measured and, and be a part of it. But nonprofits go to banks and borrow money from banks also.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's harder, yeah. But, if they're a, longstanding institution and, they're providing a critical service and they've, got good fundraising and other things, there's, I'm just saying there's more capital around at a lower cost than is often the case. So, there are lots of things that can slow down a project, but it's just, where's the line between what government does and what the private sector does?
Right.
And there are things that when state government gets involved in it, and again, this, the prior stuff with COVID was emergency response, so kind of get it out quickly, all that sort of thing. But we have time now to structure something that is as impactful as possible and isn't necessarily just about getting money out as quickly as possible, that it can really be targeted, it can be screened. And if the private sector is taking care of something, let's focus on things that only the government can do.
Right. Here. I agree.
So now, Joan, you have 5 minutes. You're going to come back tomorrow, I hope, and we can talk a lot more length. We tried to thank you for your memo.
I'm going to begin to get a complex, Mr. Chair. Every time you invite me, I end up getting crowded out, but I'll get over it.
I'm sure you will. And we'll have you back tomorrow and we'll pick up here. But
okay.
So if we could just pick up on the REMI issue and the modeling issue, that I think, and we don't have to talk about the cap at this point. We can do that tomorrow, but those are the two major changes pretty much from your memo that try to translate into legislative language. But be curious before we wrap up, because we have to go on the floor, just whether you have any problems if you look at that language, whether that makes sense to you, I'm not sure I fully understand the differences between the REMI model and other models, but your memo said we're going to use the REMI model, and I don't know if that was just shorthand.
It's because it's the one that we have license for. So rather than going through a whole process to use a different model. And the idea was to get an objective measure of economic impact as opposed to just the subjective measures. The VEGI model that economist Kvet just referred to is focused mainly on job growth. And I don't know if that works for this particular program, since this program is about capital investment. There currently, even in the VEGI model, there is a capital investment component, but it generally doesn't work if you're not growing jobs. This program is an acknowledgement that, yes, there's lots of money available in the commercial banking market, but it does not pay attention to the fact that a lot of construction, especially in the adaptive reuse or taking older buildings and bringing them up, the construction costs are exceeding the appraisal costs. So there is no bank I know of that would actually lend more than what it's going to appraise at. And so I think there are ways for us to examine that through the costs and the budgets that these projects would represent. But we don't, the other question would be, if we were going to do that, we might as well just use VEGI, right? But this is an acknowledgement that we want to improve the capital structures that exist within the state, whether that's for a nonprofit purpose or a for-profit. Now, so that's what I just wanted to address that. Yeah, we're not saying we're going to do it based on some, made up model, but these econometric models exist, and we could pay attention to the fact that, yes, maybe Burlington is going to score higher. That's why we have these other subjective considerations about whether or not this project actually has weight for that particular region. So Putnam Block, as an example, they couldn't get all bank funding for that project, right? That yes, bank funding exists. However, these projects are multi-million dollars, multi-phase. So our idea is to make something happen. This would be the piece that could make it, begin. bring it to fruition. I think the 500,000 is a problem, only because if you looked at some of the projects, and again, the list with the hemp producer, that is just an example. There is not going to be a list where people automatically get funds. There will have to be a grant process and a procedure. At one part of the iteration, I think we did put in something about VEPSI, but I don't know if you like that or wanted to use that. I see that that's been taken from the language, that they would also have the ability to review what the recommendations are from the interagency team to ensure regional distribution, since they are taken from a variety of people around the state, as well as they have each RDC as a non-voting member. So I don't know what
Okay,
you
no,
want
it's fine. I wasn't
right.
trying to compress your time to a defense of the program. I just wanted to focus on more about what Tom was talking about vis-a-vis the model and whether that together could come up with a better model, and maybe there are cost implications of doing that. But we're going to have to figure that out in the next 24 hours. And I want to say to you and to everybody that's listening, this is a slightly different animal here in terms of it's not going to necessarily say what we come up with is something we're going to go to the wall for, because we realize the timing is such short that it's still a work in progress, even as it moves over to the House. So we got to get a vehicle moving on this. And one thing I will not accept is just leaving it the way it's in the budget, which is $11 million to go to whoever ACCD wants to give the money to. And I don't think you're after that as well. You want some guidance. So that's what we're trying to do here. Okay, we'll look forward to Tom's memo. We have to be on the floor in 10 minutes. Unless somebody has questions for Joan right now, we'll pick back up with her at 8:30 tomorrow morning, if she's available.
Thanks
hope
very
so.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.